Well, good morning. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and it's great to have as our guest this morning, Mr. Mark Shaw. Mark is a former legal analyst for CNN, ESPN, and USA Today. He's a California attorney and investigative reporter. He's the author of 25 books, but he's spent the last 10 years trying to find out the truth about the JFK and Lee Harvey Oswald assassinations, and I like the way he puts that, because, of course, those were the two assassinations. Through the three books. In his most recent book, we're going to link to all three of those books, by the way, on the page. But today I want to talk to Mark about his extraordinary latest book, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, The Mysterious Death of What's My Line TV star and media icon, Dorothy Kilgallen. So, Mark, I'm old enough, I used to watch Dorothy Kilgallen on What's My Line, which was actually, and this may be difficult for young people to understand today, a smart quiz show. I mean, it was actually intelligent people and intelligent subjects. So Mark, it was a big shock when she died very early at just 52 years old. You point out that she was probably murdered because of the 18th-month assassination inquiry she was doing about the death of John F. Kennedy. So tell us what led you to write this book, why Kilgallen is important, why she deserves justice even after all these years.
Well, it's interesting. I was never going to write this book, frankly. I had written a biography of Melvin Belli and researched his representation of Jack Ruby, famous lawyer, famous clients, all that. And I had some real questions about his representation of Jack Ruby because Belli loved the mafia and the mafia loved him, and I just wondered about that insanity defense and all of that. So I covered a little bit in that in the first book. And then that led me back to the second book, The Poison Patriarch, which traced back to Joe Kennedy and his double-crossing the mafia when JFK was elected, saying he'd never go after those guys if they helped him win the 1960 election. And then, of course, Bobby Kennedy became Attorney General and went after everybody, including, of course, Carlos Marcello and the other mafiosos. So there was motive there to kill JFK so Bobby would be powerless. So I covered that, and that was going to be it for me. But while I was researching the Belli book, a friend of Belli's was telling me about, Belli knowing Dorothy Kilgallen. And like you, I remembered her from What's My Line. And I said, what? And he said, Mark, she was an incredible investigative reporter and journalist, this powerful voice in all different media. And it's interesting because when she died, Mel said to me, well, they've killed Dorothy. Now they'll go after Ruby. And I just could not get that quote out of my mind. And being a curious guy like you, I decided to look into this. I looked into the book that had been written about her, the only one by Lee Israel in the 70s. I found an article that had been written in 2007, and I started to look into this. And I was just amazed at the other parts of her life. As you know, What's My Line was watched by 20 million people every Sunday night for 15 years. But she had this Voice of Broadway column in the New York Journal-American, syndicated to 200 newspapers. She had a radio show with her husband, listened to by 1 million people in New York City. And more than that, this was an incredible investigative reporter who covered many of the great trials of the 20th century. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping case, the Dr. Sam Shepard case that became the fugitive. There's a wonderful photograph of her on one of the sites, the DorothyKilgallenStory.org, where you see her with all of the reporters surrounding her because she was the star of all those trials she covered. But I found out, of course, that she covered the Jack Ruby trial, and that just opened up my investigation and made me wonder about whether when Kilgallen died so early in life, that might be connected to her coverage of the JFK assassination.
And also the New York City police, despite a very suspicious death scene, never held an investigation.
No, they didn't. And you asked me why Dorothy's important, because I think that, I miss this. Like the other authors of books that have to do with the JFK assassination, we all miss this. If you look at all the books that are, best known about it, whether it's Posner or Bugliosi or all these other people, Dorothy's very rarely even mentioned. And when she is, in fact, the mention is rather distorted because nobody really did a lot of research about her. And, she died, and then she kind of just dropped off the face of the earth. There was no investigation despite many things that I point out in the book that were irregular about the death scene, the autopsy, all of the things that happened. And basically, they concluded that she had died of barbiturates and alcohol, and people just bought that. And all at once, it was over. I mean, she basically, was forgotten, and all of her investigation into the JFK assassination was forgotten. Nobody gave a damn. Nobody cared. They just decided that, hey, she was this druggie and this alcoholic, and so let it go. And that's what's really unfortunate here, that all this was buried for about 50 years. And I'm not the greatest researcher in the world, but I ended up finding all of this new information, this new fresh evidence about her, and I think it will make a difference with regard to what people will believe about Kilgallen and why her research into the JFK assassination is so important.
Well, tell us about the suspicious death scene and about what was missing after her death, and everything that makes you think there's something extremely funny about this.
Well, what we know about her is that she, you can trace from, first of all, her look into the JFK assassination was personal. It wasn't business. She knew JFK very well from social situations, but he was so kind to her son, Kerry, when they went to the White House for a tour, that she never forgot that kindness. And one of the quotes that I love from one of her columns is that she remembers a tall man stooping over a small boy, and talking to him about letters he had brought to the White House, and that's who she remembered as being the guy who was killed in Dallas. So it was personal right to begin with her. And as what the New York Post called the most powerful female voice in America, she was on the job, and she started looking into the JFK assassination. She went to the Ruby trial. She's the only reporter who ever interviewed Jack Ruby, and she did it twice. And then on top of that, she exposed his Warren Commission testimony before it was supposed to be released. And I think that was the turning point where those who were afraid of this fresh evidence she'd come up with that was going to be in a book she was writing for Random House, I think this is where they finally decided, listen, we need to figure out what to do with this woman, because she's the only one who is really investigating the JFK assassination. So we know that happened. We don't know exactly what Ruby told her, but that headed her to New Orleans, Carlos Marcello's empire there. And she told a hairdresser that went with her, go back to New York, don't tell anybody you were here, and so on and so forth. She then told two of her hairdressers about her fear of her son being kidnapped, that she was getting a gun, that she was worried about all of these things happening because she was so close to the truth. And you'll watch, really, in fact, on that website that I mentioned, the hairdressers talking about how scared she is. One of them says, she said, if the wrong people knew what I know now, it would cost me my life. And she was dead just a couple of weeks after that. And yes, then you look at this death scene. She was found dead in a townhouse, in her townhouse bedroom she never slept in, bed she never slept in, wearing her eyelashes, hairpiece, and makeup she never wore to bed, and clothes she never wore to bed. And despite all that, and despite the death scene just being staged, no investigation. The autopsy was performed by the Brooklyn office of the ME people, and very unusual. That was mafia controlled. I've showed in the book through all of the primary sources that we have talking about that, including a couple doctors that were there. But no investigation, despite, in fact, the autopsy saying she died of barbiturate and alcohol, barbiturate overdose and alcohol, circumstances undetermined. And it's hard to believe that nobody would have picked up on that. But it wasn't her family, her friends, the police, nobody at What's My Line, they all just bought this idea that she was a druggie and an alcoholic. And unfortunately, there was no investigation of any kind.
This is such a useful smear when somebody dies or is killed and the government and power elite would like to get rid of them and their memory. I can remember it was huge national news about how she died. I mean, it was much bigger news maybe even than her death itself. Retrospectively, of course, I think that was suspicious. I didn't think so at the time.
Well, yeah, what you're saying is you use the accused, the accuser type of thing. So you badmouth her with all these bad things about her, And so it makes people more, they believe more the fact that this person was, involved in drugs and alcohol, and then that smears everything. One of the things I'm trying to do is her voice is to bring all this back so that her remarkable career is well known. But this investigation that she had is the most credible one that there was, because I wasn't there. All these other authors weren't there. But as the videos show and the columns and the articles show, Dorothy was there. She's a credible primary source witness who was there, an eyewitness to history. And yet, it was just all buried, and nobody ever knew about anything that she did. And Dorothy made enemies, lots of enemies. J. Edgar Hoover, for instance, can imagine how upset he was with her, dismissing the Oswald alone theory right away. You had Marcello. You had Sinatra was an enemy of hers. She had all of these people, including the mafia and including this last guy that she saw the night before she died, who had reason, who had motive to kill her. But I think Dorothy felt invincible. She was so big, she was so powerful. As you said, when she died and how she died was in the news in big time, but nobody picked up on the idea that maybe there's more to the story. And that's why justice was denied for her. She never had the investigation. Nobody looked into her death at that time.
So, Mark, missing from her townhouse after her death were all her files on JFK.
She had, back in those days, you can imagine, you didn't really make copies. She used a typewriter, and so she may have had a copy that way, but she kept the original file with her at all times or under lock and key, and she wasn't showing it to anybody in terms of what was going on. It's interesting that just before her last What's My Line show, the night before they found her body the next day, she showed it to Bennett Cerf because she was writing this book for Random House, and as you know, he was the co-founder of Random House. She showed him the first chapter or two, and then apparently she had it with her as she went out to a tavern, then back to the Regency Hotel, where she was seen with this mystery man who I have on videotape. There's these videotapes of both of the hairdressers, Joe Tonahill, the co-counsel for Ruby, and the last woman to see, really, I believe, Kilgallen alive. And they all suspect that this guy that was with her, who was a lover of hers, who she had confided in about some of her JFK assassination evidence, is the culprit. And he's the guy who was probably involved with her death. He had some mafia connections. He had a violent past and all of that. And to that end, I'm sure you know that I went ahead and I've sent not one but two letters to the New York City District Attorney, Cyrus Vance Jr., asking him to investigate Kilgallen's death. I'm told that he's reviewing those letters and the evidence that I found and all of that. And my hope is now that they will look into this and some things will come to surface, and I have the great hope that file is still out there somewhere, that somebody knows about it, whether it's this guy in Ohio who's still alive that was the last person to see her or whatever. So I'm hoping that an investigation will shed light on all that, and even that file might appear at some point.
Mark, talk to us a little bit more about Jack Ruby. We don't know exactly what the interview went with him, her two interviews with him. But isn't it alone a very interesting fact that no other journalist talked to Jack Ruby?
Well, yeah, and you have to think about how big she was at the time. We've had good interest in the film rights to this now, and a guy said the other day, the newspaper back then was like social media today, because that's where people got their news, and she was huge in that area. I mean, she had 200 newspapers that printed her column every day. And really a good question about Jack Ruby. It's 50 years this month since he died. And right away she latched onto him at the Ruby trial. She didn't believe that Oswald was the answer to all of this. She thought he was a dead end, as I do. Who knows about all that stuff with him? But Ruby could be investigated. She could look into that. And so she ingratiated herself with Mel Belli and Joe Tonahill. You'll see videos of her at a news conference with them. And right away, she was on Ruby. And Joe Tonahill explains in the video on, again, the DorothyKilgallenStory.org, where how that interview came about, what Ruby thought of her, and all of that. And so that was her centerpiece for her investigation. That's what led her to New Orleans. That's what led her to say that she was going to crack that case wide open. She was going to New Orleans again to look into all of that. And I believe those people who decided that they couldn't allow her to go any further, that they, again, you talk about, the government, you talk about Hoover, you talk about Marcello. The motive is there for them to shut this woman's mouth because she's the only one who's shouting Oswald theory doesn't make any sense. I mean, she wrote that in a column 7 days after JFK was killed. Oswald file must not close. So she's out there shouting all of this, and she's focusing on Ruby. You have to think how big it was, too, that she exposed his Warren Commission testimony before it was to be released. That's like the Nixon tapes or Snowden, what he did. You can imagine. I mean, we have an FBI file that's in the book where Hoover, next to her columns she's written, writes wrong, wrong, wrong in all of this because he was just seeing that this was the only woman who was his adversary with regard to this. And, he's certainly one that could have, the book is set up as a true crime murder mystery because there's always these suspects. But Hoover and Marcello are right at the top of the list.
And certainly the people involved in this didn't hesitate to kill the President of the United States, so they're not going to hesitate if they feel it necessary to kill a big-time journalist.
Boy, you're so insightful with this because, the two hairdressers who were finally spoke about this in the late 1990s tell the interviewers or answer the interview's questions, why didn't you talk to anybody back then? Why didn't you talk to Lee Israel in 1976? Why haven't you ever brought all this information forward? And they say, because we were scared. Because we knew who had killed her. We knew about her investigation. She told us she was going to solve the JFK assassination. She knew who had killed the president. She was going to put that in the book. We weren't going to come forward and say anything way back then. And then one of the interviewers said, well, how do you feel now? Are you still scared? And the guy says, yes. Because, again, the enemies that she had, if they could get to Dorothy Kilgallen and they could kill her, well, they weren't about to stop if somebody came forward, proposing that there was more to her death than just an accidental overdose of drugs.
Well, Mark Shaw, this is a terrific book. I highly recommend it. Very well written. It's like a novel. I mean, it's a tremendous narrative, just a gripping story, and far more important than poor Dorothy Kilgallen, too, for given maybe some of the things we see the CIA doing these days. These are very bad people who don't hesitate to do bad things. This was a great lady. As I remember from What's My Line, she was a very smart and very elegant lady. I mean, she was an impressive person on television. So she was smeared in death, murdered, we think, smeared in death. And thank goodness you're attempting to give her some justice. And just your book itself, the publication of this book, is a landmark in trying to undo some of the criminality that was done to her and others.
Well, the killers won here, because the file disappeared. The book was never published, buried for all these years. And as you know, you're an outspoken critic and you're so well respected in what you do with shouting out what you have to say. But you got to be careful at times because these are bad people. And, the worst form of censorship is killing somebody. That takes care of it. And that's what happened here. And I'm just amazed at the response to the book and people who are demanding justice for Dorothy. And I'm hoping the DA will investigate now so that we can figure out what happens. You talk about the magic name of Dorothy Kilgallen. The New York Post had an article written by Sue Edelman about 3 weeks ago, a full-page article about the book and everything. 235,000 people, Sue told me, viewed that article. So, people remember Dorothy. Young people remember her from the reruns of What's My Line now. And I think there's a groundswell of support now for her case being investigated, looking into it, looking at this suspect who's still alive and all of that. So my hope is that that will happen and we'll find out what really happened to Dorothy back in 1965.
Well, Mark, may this book be made into a movie and to a documentary and otherwise reach people. I think you've already achieved a lot of your goal with the publication of this book. As we know, the majority of the American people don't buy the Warren Commission report and never have. I would say there's more skepticism of elite institutions now than ever before in American history. So it's easier for people to believe that something like this could happen. There was a time when people just couldn't conceive of anything like this being done by people connected to the U.S. government and its related institutions. So people are ready to hear this. You wrote it at the right time. Congratulations to you. Thanks for coming on the show today, and look forward to your future work. I look forward to reading some of your previous books, and you're a national asset, Mark.
Well, that really warms my heart for you to say that, because I have such respect for you and what you do. So thank you so much. It's, as I say, an honor to be on your program.
Mark, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the LRC front page. Thank you.